Before the Fellowship, what's the greatest story you've never heard? I'm Dan.
I'm Greg.
I'm Cameron.
Join us as we read and react to the Silmarillion by J.R.R. Tolkien. Last time we began chapter 18. Morgoth launched an assault against the people of Beleriand, sending rivers of fire and massive armies of dragons, balrogs, and orcs. Many mighty warriors fell, and much of Ardgallan and Dorthonion were lost. Fingolfin challenged Morgoth to combat and dealt blows to Morgoth, but he was ultimately defeated. Thorondor rescued Fingolfin's body, and he was laid to rest on a peak above Gondolin. Fingon took lordship of the house of Fingolfin. Today, we conclude chapter 18, beginning on page 154 of the second edition. Now Morgoth's power overshadowed the Northlands, but Barahir would not flee from Dorthonion and remained contesting the land foot by foot with his enemies. Then Morgoth pursued his people to the death until few remained, and all the forest of the northward slopes of that land was turned little by little into a region of such dread and dark enchantment that even the orcs would not enter it, unless need drove them. And it was called Del Duwath and Tor Norfuin, the forest under nightshade. The trees that grew there after the burning were black and grim, and their roots were tangled, groping in the dark like claws, and those who stayed among them became lost and blind and were strangled or pursued to madness by phantoms of terror. At last, so desperate was the case of Barahir that Emeldir, the man-hearted, his wife, whose mind was rather to fight beside her son and her husband than to flee, gathered together all the women and children that were left and gave arms to those that would bear them. And she led them into the mountains that lay behind, and so by perilous paths, until they came at last with loss and misery to Brethril, and the people of Galdor, Hador's son, and among those were Rian, daughter of Beleriand, and Morwen, who was named Eldorwen. That is Elfsheen, daughter of Barahir, but none ever saw again the men that they had left. For these were slain one by one until at last only 12 men remained to Barahir, Beren his son, and Barahir and Beleriand his nephews, the sons of Bregalas, and 9 faithful servants of his house whose names were long remembered in the songs of the Noldor. Rathruin and Deruin they were, Dagnir and Ragnar, Gildor and Gorlim the unhappy, Arthad, Urthel, and Hathaldir the young. Outlaws without hope they became, a desperate band that could not escape and would not yield, for their dwellings were destroyed, and their wives and children captured, slain, or fled. From Hithlum there came neither news nor help, and Barahir and his men were hunted like wild beasts. And they retreated into the barren highland above the forest, and wandered among the tarns and rocky moors of that region, furthest from the spies and spells of Morgoth. Their bed was the heather, and the roof the cloudy sky. For nigh on 2 years, after the Dagor Bragochlach, the Noldor still defended the western pass about the sources of Sirion, for the power of Ulmo was in that water, and Minas Tirith withstood the orcs. But at length, after the fall of Fingolfin, Sauron, greatest and most terrible of the servants of Morgoth, who in the Sindarin tongue was named Gothor, came against Orodreth, the warden of the tower upon Tol Sirion. Sauron was become now a sorcerer of dreadful power, Master of shadows and of phantoms, foul in wisdom, cruel in strength, mishapping what he touched, twisting what he ruled, lord of werewolves, his dominion was torment. He took Minas Tirith by assault, for a dark cloud of fear fell upon those that defended it, and Orodreth was driven out and fled to Nargothrond. Then Sauron made it into a watchtower for Morgoth, a stronghold of evil and a menace. And the fair isle of Tol Sirion became accursed, and it was called Tol in Gorhoth, the Isle of Werewolves. No living creature could pass through that veil that Sauron did not espy from the tower where he sat. And Morgoth held now the western pass, and his terror filled the fields and the woods of Beleriand. Beyond Hithlum, he pursued his foes relentlessly, and he searched out their hiding places and took their strongholds one by one. The orcs, growing ever bolder, wandered at will far and wide, coming down Sirion in the west and Kelon in the east, and they encompassed Doriath. And they harried the land so that the beast and the bird fled before them, and silence and desolation spread steadily from the north. Many of the Noldor and the Sindar they took captive and led to Angband and made them thralls, forcing them to use their skill and their knowledge in the service of Morgoth. And Morgoth sent out spies, and they were clad in false forms, and deceit was in their speech. They made lying promises of reward, and with cunning words sought to arouse fear and jealousy among the peoples, accursing their kings and chieftains of greed and of treachery and to one another. And because of the curse of the kinslaying at Aqualonde, these lies were often believed, and indeed, as the time darkened, they had a measure of truth. For the hearts and the minds of the elves of Beleriand became clouded with despair and fear. But ever the Noldor feared most the treachery of those of their own kin, who had been thralls in Angband. For Morgoth used some of these for his evil purposes, and feigning to give them liberty, sent them abroad. But their wills were chained to his, and they strayed only to come back to him again. Therefore, if any of his captives escaped in truth and returned to their own people, they had little welcome and wandered alone, outlawed and desperate. To men, Morgoth feigned pity, if any would hearken to his messages, saying that their woes came only of their servitude to the rebel Noldor, but at the hands of the rightful lord of Middle-earth they would get honor and a just reward of valor if they would leave the rebellion. But few men of the three houses of the Edain would give ear to him, not even were they brought to the torment of Angband. Therefore Morgoth pursued them with hatred, and he sent his messengers over the mountains. It is told that at this time the swarthy men came first into Beleriand. Some were already secretly under the dominion of Morgoth, and came at his call, but not all, for the rumour of Beleriand, of its land and waters, of its wars and riches, went now far and wide, and the wandering feet of men were ever set westward in those days. These men were short and broad, long and strong in the arm. Their skins were swart or sallow, and their hair was dark, as were their eyes. Their houses were many, and some had greater liking for the dwarves of the mountains than for the elves. But Mithras, knowing the weakness of the Noldor and the Edain, whereas the pits of Angband seemed to hold store inexhaustible and ever renewed, made alliance with these new-come men, and gave his friendship to the greatest of their chieftains, Bor and Ulfang. And Morgoth was well content, for this was what he had designed. The sons of Bor were Borlad, Borlak, and Borthand, and they followed Mithras and Maglor, and cheated the hope of Morgoth, and were faithful. The sons of Ulfang the Black were Ulfast and Ulwath and Uldor, the accursed, and they followed Caranthe and swore allegiance to him and proved faithless. There was small love between the Edain and the Easterlings, and they met seldom, for the newcomers abode long in East Beleriand, but Hador's folk were shut in Hithlum, and Beor's house was well nigh destroyed. The people of Halath were at first untouched by the Northern War, for they dwelt to the southward in the forest of Brethil. But now there was battle between them and the invading orcs, for they were stout-hearted men and would not lightly forsake the woods they loved. And amid the tale of defeats of that time, the deeds of the Haladin are remembered with honor, for after the taking of Minas Tirith, the orcs came through the western pass, and maybe would have ravaged even the mouths of Sirion, but Halmir, lord of the Haladin, sent swift word to Thingol, for he had friendship with the elves that guarded the borders of Doriath. Then Beleg Strongbow, chief of the March Wardens of Thingol, brought great strength of the Sindar, armed with axes, into Brethil, and issuing from the deeps of the forest, Halmir and Beleg took an orc legion at unawares and destroyed it. Thereafter, the black tide out of the north was stemmed in that region, and the orcs dared not cross the Teiglin for many years after. The people of Haleth dwelt in watchful peace in the forests of Brethil, and behind their guard, the kingdom of Nargothrond had respite and mustered its strength. At this time, Hurin and Huro, the sons of Galdor of Dorlomin, were dwelling with the Haladin, for they were akin. In the days before Dagor Braglochlach, those two houses of the Edain were joined at great feast, when Galdor and Glorethrill, the children of Haedor Goldenhead, were wedded to Hareth and Haldir, the children of Halmir, lord of the Haladin. Thus it was that the sons of Galdor were fostered in Brethil by Haldir their uncle, according to the custom of men in that time. And they went both to that battle with the orcs, even Hur, for he would not be restrained, though he was but 13 years old. But being with a company that was cut off from the rest, they were pursued to the ford of Brithiach, and there they would have been taken or slain, but for the power of Ulmor, that was still strong in Sirion. A mist arose from the river and hid them from their enemies, and they escaped over the Brithiach into Dimbar and wandered through the hills beneath the sheer walls of Chrysagurim, until they were bewildered in the deceits of that land and knew not the way to go or to return. There Thorondor espied them, and he sent 2 of his eagles to their aid. And the eagles bore them up and brought them beyond the encircling mountains to the secret vale of Thumladen and the hidden city of Gondolin, which no man yet had seen. There Turgon, the king, received them well, and he learned of their king, for messages and dreams had come up to him from Sirion, from the sea, from Ulmo, lord of the waters, warning him of woe to come and counseling him to deal kindly with the sons of the house of Haedor, from whom help should come to him at need. Hurin and Huro dwelt as guests in the king's house for well nigh a year, and it is said that in this time Hurin learned much lore of the elves, and understood also something of the counsels and purposes of the king. For Turgon took a great liking for the sons of Galdor, and spoke much with them. And he wished indeed to keep them in Gondolin out of love, and not only for his law that no stranger, be he elf or man, who found the way to the secret kingdom and looked upon the city should ever depart again, until the king should open the Liga, and the hidden people should come forth. But Hurin and Hor desired to return to their own people and share in the wars and griefs that now beset them. And Hurin said to Turgon, "Lord, we are but mortal men, and unlike the Eldar. They may endure for long years awaiting battle with their enemies in some far distant day, but for us the time is short, and our hope and strength soon wither. Moreover, we did not find the road to Gondolin, and indeed we do not know surely where this city stands, for we were brought in fear and wonder by the highways of the air, and in mercy our eyes were veiled." Then Turgon granted his prayer, and he said, "By way that you came, you have leave to depart. If Throndir Dor is willing, I grieve at this parting. Yet, in a little while, as the Eldar account it, we may meet again." But Meglin, the king's sister son, who was mighty in Gondolin, grieved not at all at their going, though he begrudged them the favour of the king. For he had no love for any of the kindred of men, and he said to Hurin, "The king's grace is greater than you know, and the law is become less stern than aforetime, or else no choice would be given you but to abide here till your life's end." Then Hurin answered him, "The king's grace is greater than you know, and it is great indeed. But if our word is not enough, then we will swear oaths to you." And the brothers swore never to reveal the counsels of Turgon, and to keep secret all that they had seen in his realm. Then they took their leave, and the eagles coming bore them away by night, and set them down in Dorlomin before the dawn. Their kinsfolk rejoiced to see them, for messengers of Berethil had reported they were lost, but they would not declare even to their father where they had been, save that they were rescued in the wilderness by the eagles that brought them home. But Galdor said, "Did you there then dwell a year in the wild, or did the eagles house you in their eyries? But you found food and fine raiment, and return as young princes, not as waifs of the wood." And Hurin answered, "Be content that we have returned, for only under oath of silence was this permitted." Then Galdor questioned them no more, but he and many others guessed at the truth, and in time the strange fortune of Hurin and Huor reached the ears of the servants of Morgoth. Now when Turgon learned of the breaking of the Liga of Amband, he would not suffer any of his own people to issue forth to war, for he deemed that Gondolin was strong, and the time was not yet ripe for its revealing. But he believed also that the ending of the siege was the beginning of the downfall of the Noldor, unless aid should come. And he sent companies of the Gondolindrim in secret to the mouths of Sirion and the Isle of Belar. There they built ships and set sail into the uttermost west upon Turgon's errand, seeking for Valinor, to ask for pardon and aid of the Valar, and they besought the birds of the sea to guide them. But the seas were wild and wide, and shadow and enchantment lay upon them, and Valinor was hidden. Therefore none of the messengers of Turgon came into the west, and many were lost, and few returned. But the doom of Gondolin drew nearer. Rumour came to Morgoth of these things, and he was unquiet amid his victories. And he desired greatly to learn tidings of Felagund and Turgon, for they had vanished out of knowledge, and yet were not dead, and he feared that they might yet accomplish against him. Of Nargothrond he knew indeed the name, but neither its place nor its strength. And of Gondolin he knew nothing, and the thought of Turgon troubled him the more. Therefore he sent forth ever more spies into Beleriand, and he recalled the main hosts of the orcs to Angband, for he perceived that he could not yet make a final and victorious battle until he had gathered new strength, and he had not measured rightly the valor of the Noldor, nor the might in the arms of the men that fought beside them. Great though his victory had been in Golach and in the years after, and grievous the harm that he had done to his enemies, his own loss had been no less. And though he held Dorthonion and the pass of Sirion, the Eldar, recovering from their first dismay, began now to regain what they had lost. Thus, Beleriand in the south had a semblance of peace again for a few brief years, but the forges of Angband were full of labor. When 7 years had passed since the fourth battle, Morgoth renewed his assault, and he sent force against Hithlum. The attack on the passes of the shadowy mountains was bitter, and in the siege of Tol Sirion Galdor, the tall lord of Dolomin was slain by an arrow. That fortress he held on behalf of Fingon the High King, and in that same place his father Hador Lindol died but a little time before. Hurin, his son, was then newly come to manhood, but he was great in strength, both of mind and body, and he drove the orcs with heavy slaughter from the Eredwethrin and pursued them far across the sands of Fargolith. But King Fingon was hard to put it to hold back the army of Angband that came down from the north, and battle was joined upon the very plains of Hithlum. There Fingon was outnumbered, but the ships of Círdan sailed in great strength up the firth of Drengust, and in the hour of need the elves of the Falas came upon the host of Morgoth from the west. Then the orcs broke and fled, and the Eldar had the victory, and their horsed archers pursued them even until the Iron Mountains. Thereafter Hurin, son of Galdor, ruled the house of Hador in Dolorin and served Fingon. Hurin was of less stature than his fathers, or his son after him, but he was tireless, enduring in body, lithe, and swift, after the manner of his mother's kin. Hareth of the Haladin, his wife, was Morwen Elthwen, daughter of Baragund of the house of Beor, she who fled from Dorthonion, with Rian, daughter of Belagund, and Imeldir, the mother of Beren. In that time also the outlaws of Dorthonion were destroyed, as is told hereafter, and Beren, son of Barahir, alone escaping, came hardly into Doriath. All right. Sorry, I was interrupted. My daughter has woken up out of bed and she has been bugging me for the past several paragraphs. So I've just been trying to keep her quiet over here, and she's been very good. And she's only 3, but she has been
Look, Greg has a son that's bugging him.
Look who that is, Andy Norton. How are you doing?
Andy Norton.
It's a good friend.
Crashing you guys' party.
Andy, yeah. Can you sum up for us the first 160 pages of the Silmarillion, please?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah, just off the top of my head from the last time I read it when I was 12 years old.
Wait, you mean you haven't been listening along with this podcast?
Oh, of course I have. Sorry.
All kinds of guests today.
Oh my gosh, great to see you guys. Sorry, I'm crashing this party. My name's Andy, and I'm friends with all 3 of these chaps.
Andy, you should be the one doing this podcast just by yourself. I don't know why we're doing this podcast.
Well, as the founder and first steward of the Lord of the Rings Club in my hometown of Cooper, Indiana. You know, I honestly though, I was
Andy, you could be our one. He could be our One Ring Excuse me. He could be our One Ring
lore master.
Like the narrator? Or
Yeah.
Okay, do you know what the One Ring is? It's a
the
role-playing game. We want to do like a live stream where we each pick characters, but we need a lore master.
By lore master, you mean like a dungeon master, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. Yes.
That's funny. Yes, I have done that sort of thing before. Actually, when I was a kid, I ran Lord of the Rings.
Do it again. Do it again.
You'd be great at that.
Yeah,
I'd love that.
Thanks, guys. Well, this is great.
You can insert some comments. We'll just summarize the chapter real quick. 12 men make a final stand against the armies of Morgoth in Dorthonion. Barahir, his son, Beren, and 10 others. Sauron takes Tol Sirion and transforms it into an outpost for Morgoth. Morgoth captures many men and elves and makes them his thralls. I am enthralled to find out what a thrall is. But he also releases many back into Beleriand to sow treachery. Men from the east enter Beleriand at the call of Morgoth. Some betray him and side with the Eldar and the Dane. Some of the Haladin are rescued from orcs by the eagles and taken to Gondolin. Turgon welcomes them, but Morgoth has no love for men. Turgon sends emissaries into the west to seek help from the Valar, but none are able to reach Valinor. After regrouping, Morgoth attacks Fingon in Hithlum, but Círdan sends aid. Together, they successfully drive back the opposing army. Hurin rules the House of Hador, and the 12 outlaws in Dorthonion. Only Beren escapes into Doriath. All right, this was kind of a cool chapter. I liked the imagery. I liked Morgoth and Sauron kind of developing their land and building some strongholds and whatnot.
Dan, I liked how you just made up your own words. I like how you just were riffing on Tolkien like you know better words than he knows.
Like what? Tell me. Like
there was a part where you read, it was like, I don't know.
I had a daughter in here with me. She was like bugging me, so I'm like trying to find my place on the page.
This is it. This is, I found where you read, it's on 159, you read, then Hurin answered him, the king's grace is greater than you know.
Well, I lost my place.
And great indeed.
Great indeed.
But to be fair, it's pretty close to what it said, and it doesn't get away from it.
Oh, totally, yeah. Wait, okay, actually, what you did made me wonder something. I was thinking, I think in my mind, the way that I read is like line by line. Yeah. But maybe that's not actually true. Like maybe we read a chunk at a time and just kind of piece it all together. Because you seem to be able to just like add or remove words and not really change the meaning of that whole paragraph.
I realize that I'm like brain farting, and then I'm correcting the brain fart as it happens.
Yeah.
Greg doesn't like the word brain fart.
Well, when a British person says it, it's passable.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, all farts are passable, but. Anyway, Ella, what do you need,
a messy
sweetie?
One, isn't it?
I peed.
You peed, but you have a nappy on. That's British for diaper. So you don't need to come and interrupt me. Can you go? Can you make it back to your bed, please?
How much is this gonna make the cat?
I know exactly.
Can you go back? That's fine. I'll come.
Here's a question for you guys. Imeldir the man-hearted. Would you ever call your wife man-hearted? Do you think that's a compliment? Is that an attractive
mind was rather
quality?
to fight than to flee, I would.
Will you say she's man-hearted?
Not my wife.
Let me know how it goes. Okay.
Well, her husband doesn't call her that. Tolkien calls her that.
Yeah. Is it a compliment? It is a compliment. It's kind of an older English
I do
term.
think, I was thinking about that. It definitely stands out. I was thinking it's more like now we just have, we're so conditioned to think of these things with like a value tied to it. But I think he's just making an observation that doesn't have value attached to it.
Well, it reminds me of the chief. Remember the chieftain it was a female chief from a previous chapter, and it was a situation where she was strong and she was a leader, but after she died, then it was a man who took her place, and then it continued with male lineage. So it is, some women have really strong, brave leader hearts.
We talked about this last time with the, obviously Tolkien was influenced by Nordic religion, society, and there was many female Nordic warriors. So I'm sure that he read legends of them and was inspired by them kind of rising up. And then also in England, I mentioned this as well last time, that one Roman Boadicea. She came on a chariot and basically was really man-hearted.
Well, to me, it makes me think about, like, in this modern day, is there so much a difference in terms of, like, would that even make sense today? Whereas back in this
probably wouldn't make sense.
There's such a stark difference in terms of who's fighting and who's the different roles. But today, and like when we don't face any sort of physical challenges like they are, or battle, it's just a totally different context. It's hard to even
the classic understanding of like how a man fights for his family versus how a woman fights is a man goes outside of himself and attacks, and a woman will defend and like gather in and like protect in that way.
And I think that does hold true. Though it is interesting to think about how, we just have become so comfortable in this modern age. It makes me think, am I living a life such that there even is that sort of difference, that could starkly be called, man-hearted.
Do people call me
I
man?
have a man-hearted?
Exactly.
Okay, so man-hearted is a compliment. What about man-headed?
Well, man-faced would be pretty bad.
Oh boy.
Man-hands.
She was very man-headed.
In truth, though, this whole passage about these outlaws in Dorthonion is so cool. Like they're desperate. They're like, everyone's dead. They're the last ones there, just holding this place down. And I love this this is what I love about Tolkien. It's just all these vignettes. Every once in a while, he'll just drop these sentences that are just so beautiful. I think that, I don't know, maybe I'm overstating this, but it's that last bit of page 155 where it says, their wives and children were captured, slain, or fled. They retreated. It says, and they retreated to the barren highland above the forest and wandered among the tarns and rocky moors of that region, furthest from the spies and spells of Morgoth. Their bed was the heather and their roof the cloudy sky. And I don't know, it's just like, he does such a good job of just painting like this is their situation right now. And just that, like the little alliteration, the spies and spells of Morgoth, like, which is exactly the ways that like we've seen over and over again. This is exactly how Morgoth operates. And I don't know. It's just a good sentence.
I have a question at this point in the story, because earlier Fingolfin, he
died.
The last reading, it says he sees the like doom or like the ruin, almost the utter ruin of the Noldor after the big battle. And then now we're focusing on the men. So my question is, are the Noldor outside of Gondolin almost extinct?
I don't think quite that much. I think part of it too was that he was kind of pinned in too in Hithlum or wherever he's from. So I think he had no news from outside, and he saw the destruction at his own doors and just thought like everyone else must be dead out there.
Gotcha. So, yeah, that makes sense.
He, just went into rage mode and
because we do hear about these other locations that are attacked,
right?
Which would be new places.
It does seem the places they mentioned by name that are like in ruin are all kind of on the north part of Beleriand. Like Dorthonion is up there north of Doriath, and Ardgalen is like that plain between the mountains and Angband. So it's all kind of the northern part that seems to be really destroyed. But we just heard that Turgon and Gondolin is still safe, and Thingol's still safe in Doriath. because they're kind of hidden places. So I don't think they're as gone as it seems, but they really, I mean, it was a big defeat.
There's big moves happening for sure.
Yeah.
I love the taking of Minas Tirith. It's a different Minas Tirith, right?
Yeah.
It's not the same, it's not the same one.
Biggest Tirith, I think.
I think that's a really cool description. But then the idea that they're capturing people and making them thralls, which I mean I've never heard that phrase before. I know it's not a Tolkienism. I guess a quick search of the internet could probably answer my question.
I think it's like a slave.
Yeah.
Yeah. Never heard it before.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, but yes, no, never heard of it.
Yeah, it means like a slave. Although I remember there was a video game growing up where the thralls are also like these sort of undead.
Warcraft?
No, I don't think it was.
It's in Warcraft as well because that's what came up when I Google searched
I think it's called Myth.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, the state of being in someone's power or having great power over someone. There's this like harrowing part where later on you just hear about like the thralls, like, but ever the Noldor feared the most treachery of their own kin, who had been thralls in Angband.
Yeah.
Or this is the harrowing part.
Yeah.
Morgoth used some of these for his evil purposes, and feigning to give them liberty, sent them abroad. But their wills were chained to his, and they strayed only to come back to him again. That's it's a great analogy for sin right there. Like,
well, you actually have
analogy.
Heard the word. You've used the word, I'm sure. Enthralled, right?
Yeah.
Enthralled. That's literally what they were, right? They were enthralled with Morgoth.
There we go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. Etymology. Yeah. It is. That's a really terrifying depiction where they're just like so broken and they've lost their own will. So they just kind of wander around. Like, could you imagine just you're on the road, you're kind of defensive because there's a lot of danger out in the world, and you just see some elf that you haven't seen in 6 years just kind of standing there listless and like, it's like
zombie, like almost a zombie. Like,
it's like scarier than something that jumps out at you.
Yeah,
because there's like a deadness inside them,
or an undeadness, right? Right, guys? Zombies. Nope.
And deadness.
Camgorahern.
Yeah, you got to see our pun names. You got to go to our YouTube
Andy,
channel.
you need a pun name. So I'm Danrod, which is a play on Damrod. Okay. We have Gregolas, which you've been introduced to before.
Wait, I thought you were Finrod. No, you're Damrod.
Damrod, which is one of the men that travels with Boromir and Faramir. He actually helps
Frodo,
and Sam.
You know what? I didn't even realize that Gregolas was not named after Legolas until last reading. He's like,
Gregolas.
One of the men in this story.
Cameron, you've changed your name to Camgorahern. I don't know what is that in reference to.
The Angora Drim.
That's like so meta.
It's my name.
Like you've just gone like a route, like you've just strayed so far.
Okay, I've got a possible one. So I could be Angbandy.
Angbandy, we'll go with
Angbandy.
You're named after the most terrible place in all of Middle Earth.
No, Angbandy is the most fun place in all the earth. It's actually in the south. It's the zaniest place in all the earth. It's really fun there.
I was thinking you could be named Mr. Andrews after the architect of the Titanic.
Wrong
Totally
book. Greg.
Well, no, he keeps relating the Titanic to
the captain of the Titanic is plays Theoden, isn't he? Yeah,
is that the same guy?
Yeah, same.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. I love the whole thrall thing. Just to talk about that for a second I love that that description of just them walking around and them having like a feigned freedom, and that they're actually almost more concerned with them. Like that's just so, it speaks so much to even just how people walk around today, right? Enslaved to their phones and like a feigned freedom.
That's me.
No, I mean, totally.
I
mean,
feel so thrally
yeah.
sometimes. And I like freedom. When I think about freedom, I just think like the freedom to just, well, it's to choose the good, right? It's to be present to my kids, to love them, to be present there, and not to be, yeah, sometimes I feel like the phone is kind of like this like thing chained around my ankle. Keeps me weighed down.
Yeah. And you don't realize that oftentimes that, and then suddenly you maybe break out of that for a little bit, and you look around and you realize you see everyone else enthralled, and it's so startling. And yeah, it's kind of like in, was it Incredibles 2, the screen slaver or whatever it is. Like there's one of those bad guys who like has like a manifesto that actually people can kind of get behind, because he's talking about people being like enslaved to screens. And yeah, I think it's something, I just think I really relate to that, what you're saying, Cameron, of feeling that in myself. But then also when you break out of that, looking around, and it's almost like just seeing how much of our lives we can walk around as zombies, and how many of our compatriots are walking around not knowing the slavery that they're experiencing.
So there's something about Morgoth that has the same appeal of the iPhone 14. There's some common qualities that they share.
So when they capture them, this is just curious. Like, many of the Noldor and the Sindar, they took captive, that's the orcs, and led to Angband and made them thralls. And now this is the bit that's curious to me, forcing them to use their skill and their knowledge in the service of Morgoth. What is that? Is it just indentured servant type, like just whip them into
I don't know.
service, or is it more subtle than that?
I noticed that line. I was thinking like, because Angband is just this dark, like scary place. There's like smoke, like the mountains are belching smoke, and there's these, there's like industry happening there. And I'm thinking like maybe one of these elves just made like a really nice stone arch or something. There's like one little like room in Angband that's like really nice.
Yeah, just a solace, a place for him to.
Yeah.
Like a really nice putting green somewhere.
No, I don't know.
It was invented in this world, so I
mean, we know that the elves have learned a lot from like the Valar and the dwarves about working metals and gems and stuff. So he could really find all kinds of purposes.
And I would imagine the way he'd bend their wills is over time, and by almost like if you don't see the light for long enough and you're told enough lies, like your will can be bent in that way. So less like a kind of I'm gonna whip you until you listen to me, but more like deceit and
subtle.
A kind of torture, like a psychological torture.
And then like this is so sick, letting them go with the full like sneaky knowledge that that they're not going to be able to resist the draw to come back for whatever reason, which is unclear. It's so unclear.
Well, for some people it's better to reign in hell than to serve in heaven, as the saying goes. So if you go out into the real world after being chained up for so long, and you had a place of, I was Morgoth's, person who did his maps or whatever it was. And then you leave and you're just, the real world doesn't feel real to you, or it doesn't feel like home to you after a while, I imagine.
I know we're running pretty long, but I wanted to at least mention this last bit here. There's kind of two other little sections here. One is where the men come in from the east, which that's interesting in itself, but if we talk about that, I don't really care. But the thing I'm really interested in is the Holodin here, who are pretty much overtaken by the orcs, and then the eagles rescue them and take them to Gondolin.
Oh yeah,
that's kind of an interesting bit here. I love this line. So Huron and Hur are two of the ones that are brought to Gondolin, and surprisingly, Turgon actually welcomes them, even though he's very secretive and isolationist. But eventually they're like, we got to go back to battle. Like we're going to die in a couple decades here. And I love this. They're playing with Turgon. We're but mortal men. And unlike the Eldar, they may endure for long years, awaiting battle with their enemies in some far distant day. But for us, the time is short, and our hope and our strength soon wither. And he just lets them go. Like he seems to, you know, he's fond of them, and he recognizes, like, he's able to understand their perspective. Like that seems, so far that seemed to be such a mystery to the elves, just the mortality of men. But he's kind of like able to understand their position and their desire to just go out and take advantage of the life that they have.
Well, it's interesting because they're sort of, I mean, there's some sort of oath or promise bound that anybody who goes there can't leave. Right. And yet they, like, you know, for fear of revealing the location, which makes sense. But he's reasonable because they tell this sort of emotional story that, like, we're gonna die, and then they say, look, our eyes were covered. Yeah. We didn't see our entry. We were taken in by eagles. Like, he's like, okay, well then you can go out by eagles too.
Yeah. Kind of think of it, Turgon is kind of the opposite of the men. Like, he's biding his time as long as he needs to. He knows, like, I'm hidden here. And it even points out that Morgoth doesn't know where he doesn't even know about Gondolin, I think. And it makes him afraid of Turgon. He knows it's hidden, but he doesn't even know about Gondolin. So in a sense, Turgon has all the time in the world to plan and plot, and the men are like they're dying by the second.
Yeah, he's like, where the heck is that Turgon guy? Like, he's just disappeared. He's been gone. He's been gone for hundreds of years. What happened? He's doing what I'm doing, which is building secret forces. It's like paranoia, like in his own head. Like he's always in fear. Yeah, like we saw that with Fingolfin, right? When Fingolfin got slain, he was afraid of Fingolfin. Like, he feared the power that he had. Yep. All right, we should stop there. Or did you have one other thing, Greg?
No, that was it. That was
okay, you got both the things out. If you like what you hear, go ahead and rate us 3 Silmarils out of 3. Follow us everywhere at Before the Fellowship. Join the discussion on Discord. And send any comments and questions to beforethefellowship@gmail.com. Join us next week as we read the greatest story you've never heard, The Silmarillion by J.R.R. Tolkien.